Sofia Vernon, a 30-year-old artist from Seattle, had grown up in the shadow of her family's indifference. From adolescence, she sensed her place in the household was more decorative than essential, a quiet background figure in a home where attention was currency and she held none. Her parents, both prestigious attorneys known in Washington's legal circles, never made a secret of their pride in her older brother, Michael. He was the embodiment of their aspirations, a straight-A student turned high-powered corporate attorney, often described as the future of the Vernon name. Sofia, in contrast, was introduced at family functions as our free spirit or the creative one, a label that simultaneously excused and dismissed her. She had pursued art not to rebel, but to breathe. Yet every canvas she painted, every local exhibition she held, was met with half-smiles and polite nods from a family who measured success by salaries and degrees. Her studio was never visited. Her work was never asked about. Her name, when mentioned, came as an afterthought or an obligation. 5 years ago, during what would become her final holiday dinner with the family, something inside her broke. The evening had followed its usual pattern, Michael dominating the conversation with tales of mergers and real estate portfolios, their parents nodding in admiration. When Sofia tried to share news of her solo show at a local gallery, her father glanced at his watch. Her mother changed the subject. That night, Sofia confronted them. She voiced years of restrained emotion, naming the coldness she had lived under, the silence that followed every achievement, the weight of always being tolerated but never celebrated. Her words were not met with outrage, only with quiet condescension. Her father offered a clipped remark about her being overly emotional, while her mother refilled her wine and asked Michael about his next case. Sofia left before dessert. She never returned. In the years that followed, not a single call came from home. No birthday wishes, no letters, no invitation to Michael's wedding. Her childhood bedroom was converted into a guest room without mention. In family photo albums posted online by distant cousins, she noticed her absence. Group shots cropped just enough to erase her. Sofia had not just been excluded, she had been erased. Yet in that absence, she began to find a strange kind of clarity. Without their voices in her life, her own began to grow louder. But the ache of that quiet betrayal, the knowledge that the people who should have seen her most had chosen not to see her at all, never fully disappeared. It happened by accident. Sofia had been scrolling through her messages during a quiet afternoon at her studio when a name she hadn't seen in years lit up her phone. Danielle Brooks, a girl she had once shared a locker with in high school. The message was casual, almost cheerful, asking if she was going to be at Michael's big birthday event that weekend. Confused, Sofia had typed back a short reply, unsure of what event Danielle was referring to. A few minutes later, she received a link. The website was glossy, professional, filled with curated photos and bold typography, celebrating 40 years of success, a tribute to Michael Vernon. The party was to be held at the Lake Arden Estate, a sprawling lakeside mansion the family had rented for the weekend. The guest list included over 100 people, business partners, extended relatives, old college friends. There would be live jazz, catering from a Michelin-starred chef, and even a write-up in a lifestyle magazine covering elite social gatherings in the Pacific Northwest. Sofia scrolled further, her heart tightening with every image. There, in the center of the page, was a photograph of her family taken at a pre-party gathering. Her parents flanked Michael, both beaming with pride, surrounded by familiar faces. There was no trace of her, not a single mention, not even a vague nod to her existence. It was as though she had died years ago and been conveniently buried beneath the polished narrative of the Vernon legacy. That discovery didn't lead to tears, not at first. Instead, there was a cold stillness that settled inside her chest. Something final. She closed the browser and sat for a long while, her hands resting on her lap, her mind circling through the past. The choice was clear. She could let them erase her entirely, or she could reclaim her presence in the only language her family ever seemed to understand: spectacle. Within the hour, she began drafting a plan. She wouldn't ask to be invited. She wouldn't confront anyone in private or plead for acknowledgement. That chapter was closed. This was something different, something theatrical. She would become someone they couldn't ignore. Not Sophia, the overlooked daughter, not the forgotten sibling, but a persona so magnetic, so unfamiliar, that they would unknowingly welcome her in. She chose a name, Sylvie Martin. It sounded elegant, detached, perfectly ambiguous. She designed a story around her: an art patron from New York with ties to several foundations, interested in networking with rising West Coast business figures. Over the next several days, she secured a couture dress on loan from a boutique she'd once collaborated with, scheduled a hair transformation, and hired a stylist to craft a look both sharp and unrecognizable. It wasn't revenge that guided her, not entirely. It was something deeper: a need to be seen, not as an outsider begging for love, but as someone whose presence demanded acknowledgement. She studied the event program, memorized key details, and timed her arrival to perfection. There would be no warning, no hint of her return. Only the moment, silent, glittering, and impossible to ignore, when she would walk into the room, and their illusion of her disappearance would collapse. For 2 weeks, Sophia disappeared into a meticulous world of transformation. Every day was a rehearsal for reinvention. She studied herself in the mirror not as an artist, but as a subject, breaking down her appearance into elements to be reconstructed. She made an appointment with a stylist she trusted, someone discreet and capable of executing a vision without questions. The request was precise: shoulder-length platinum hair, sculpted in soft waves, refined but arresting. Her natural dark curls vanished beneath the bleach and precision of image making. Her wardrobe became a curated collection of calculated elegance. She selected a sleek navy dress from a limited European line, paired with a tailored white coat and minimalist jewelry that whispered old money without screaming for attention. Every piece was chosen for effect, meant to evoke sophistication with just enough aloofness to inspire curiosity. Shoes imported from Milan, a fragrance with notes of blackcurrant and iris, and a custom-made clutch completed the image. She practiced her posture, her gestures, even the cadence of her voice. The accent, vaguely French with a transatlantic polish, came from hours of listening to interviews and mimicking speech patterns. The name came last: Sylvia Martin, a name that sounded at home in an art catalog or investment report, clean and timeless. She created a background as an investor and curator affiliated with 2 East Coast arts organizations, both real enough to validate without inviting suspicion. Her entry onto the guest list was arranged through a clever email written in flawless professional tone, referencing mutual contacts, philanthropy, and strategic cultural partnerships. The response came quickly. She was confirmed as a VIP guest. The night of the event arrived. As she stepped from the hired car onto the stone driveway of the lakeside estate, she was no longer Sofia Vernon. She was Sylvia Martin. She walked with measured grace through the entrance, past the valet and security, into a ballroom drenched in warm light and the sound of a string quartet. Her presence made heads turn, not with recognition, but with intrigue. She moved through the crowd with effortless charm, offering polished smiles and carefully layered anecdotes about a recent acquisition in Berlin and an artist in residence program in Lyon. Her family didn't notice her at first. She was just another elegant figure in a room full of them. When her mother finally approached, drawn by polite introductions and whispers of wealth, she smiled with unfamiliar warmth. They spoke of art, of philanthropy, of shared values. Michael arrived mid-conversation, radiant in his tailored tuxedo, glass of champagne in hand. He leaned in, introduced himself again, twice out of habit, and laughed at her small commentary about West Coast galleries. His interest grew quickly, his eyes lingering, his charm effortless but unmistakably flirtatious. Throughout the evening, Sophia floated from group to group, absorbing every glance, every word, every moment of unknowing validation. No one suspected, not her cousins, not her former classmates now working for Michael's firm, not the mother who had once told her she was too sensitive to be taken seriously. Sylvia Martin had entered their world as a ghost in silk, and they welcomed her without question. And as she raised her glass during one of the toasts, catching her reflection in the tall mirror across the room, she realized what she had created was not a disguise. It was a monument to the person they had refused to see. The evening had unfolded with the calculated rhythm of a high society performance. Waiters moved like shadows between clusters of guests, champagne flutes shimmered under chandeliers, and string music wove a silk thread through the air. Outside, the lake reflected the soft glow of paper lanterns, and inside, the air buzzed with polite laughter and the subtle tension of competition dressed as celebration. As the hour neared 9, the murmurs began. It was time for the toast. The lights dimmed slightly, and guests turned their attention to the raised platform near the grand piano. There stood Sophia's father, radiating pride in a bespoke tuxedo, silver cufflinks glinting as he held up a glass. His voice carried across the room, warm and steady as he spoke of legacy. He thanked the guests for their presence, spoke of tradition and values, and lauded his son as the future of their name. Michael stood beside him, eyes bright, chin lifted. They looked like royalty, bathed in applause and familial triumph. The crowd responded with synchronized admiration, glasses lifted high. And then, quietly, another figure stepped forward. The shift in atmosphere was subtle at first, a ripple of curiosity, a few tilted heads. Sylvia Martin, the enigmatic art patron from New York, had requested the microphone. The host smiled politely and gestured for her to join them, unaware of the storm that was about to break. She took the mic with practiced ease, thanking the hosts for the evening, her tone gracious and poised. Then her voice slowed. She began to speak not as Sylvia, but as someone else entirely. She talked of families, not the polished kind presented in speeches, but the ones built on expectations and silence. She described what it meant to grow up unseen, to feel like a shadow moving quietly behind other people's pride. She painted an image of absence, one not born of distance, but of erasure. A child who had learned that the opposite of love wasn't hate, but invisibility. Her words clung to the air, unsettling in their calm precision. Faces in the crowd began to shift from interest to unease. Murmurs stilled. Even the waitstaff paused. Then, with one motion, she reached up and removed the platinum wig. A collective gasp spread across the room like a crack of thunder. The shimmer of her new persona gave way to the familiar lines of a face long forgotten. It was Sophia. Not a ghost, not a memory, but flesh and blood, standing beneath the lights with truth burning in her eyes. Her mother's expression collapsed first, draining of color, then stiffening into panic. Her father blinked, the glass still suspended in midair, unable to process the image in front of him. Michael turned his face downward, his shoulders taut, his hands clenched. The silence became unbearable, an oppressive weight pressing down on every corner of the room. No one moved, no one spoke. Sophia held the gaze of each person she passed. And then, without another word, she handed the microphone back, turned, and walked down from the platform, heels echoing in the quiet. The illusion had shattered. The party would go on, but nothing about it would ever feel the same. The silence that followed Sophia's revelation was not the kind that invited reflection. It was the kind that exposed. Guests stood frozen, expressions trapped between disbelief and discomfort, unsure whether to applaud, retreat, or pretend nothing had happened. One person clapped, a few hesitant taps that echoed like falling glass. Another quietly set down their drink and slipped out the side entrance. Conversations halted mid-sentence, the hum of polite society replaced by the ache of being confronted with something raw and unfiltered. In the center of it all stood her family, motionless. Her mother attempted to recover first, adopting the familiar expression of strained composure, smoothing the fabric of her dress as though order could be restored by appearance alone. Her father looked as if the ground beneath him had tilted, his pride cracked open by the realization of what the room now saw. Michael remained still, his eyes distant, the practiced veneer of charm finally stripped away. Someone approached Sophia, murmuring something conciliatory, an attempt to bridge the chasm that had opened. She didn't respond, not out of malice, but because she had no desire to hear apologies crafted in panic. The moment wasn't about reconciliation, it was about truth. She had not come to ask for her place back. She had come to show them that she never needed their permission to exist. Every polished word they'd spoken tonight, every curated photograph on the walls, now stood in contrast to the unspoken parts of their legacy. Some guests began quietly collecting their coats. Others lingered by the bar, whispering behind half-raised glasses, casting glances toward the woman who had just dismantled the evening with a single speech. No one looked directly at her for long. Her presence had become a mirror, and most were unwilling to face their reflections. Sophia walked through the crowd with slow, steady steps, the same heels that once clicked in rhythm with her performance, now carrying her through the wreckage of a fiction undone. She passed by old friends who had forgotten her name, relatives who had memorized only half the family tree, and hosts who suddenly no longer felt in control of their own celebration. She stepped outside into the cool night air. The sound of the lake lapping gently against the dock replaced the hush behind her. She didn't look back. The mansion, still glowing with its chandeliers and artful lighting, no longer held any meaning. It was just a building dressed in performance, anchored in a version of the world that had tried to erase her. Ahead lay nothing but darkness and silence, but it was a silence of her own choosing, free from the hunger for validation, free from the weight of pretending. In that stillness, there was space. And in that space, there was something new. Not loneliness, not exile, but clarity. For the first time in years, she walked without fear. The morning after the party, the story had already begun to spread. Social media posts flooded with speculation. Snippets of video taken on guests' phones circulated quickly, showing the moment when the elegant art investor removed her wig and revealed a face few had expected to see. Headlines appeared on local blogs and art forums. Mystery woman interrupts elite celebration. Vernon family surprise at Lake Arden Gala. Identity reveal stuns high society crowd. In the videos, no names were spoken, but the comments filled in the blanks. People guessed, debated, speculated. Some recalled her vaguely from years ago. Others denied she had ever been part of the family. Sophia remained silent. She didn't comment, didn't post, didn't explain. She let the curiosity swirl without offering an anchor. For her, the moment had passed. What mattered now was what came next. A month later, she opened her gallery. Nestled in a quiet corner of Capitol Hill in Seattle, it stood behind a facade of glass and warm wood, understated and deliberate. The sign above the door read simply, Vernon. Not Vernon, the family name she had been born into and then buried under. Vernon, stripped down, personal, her own. Inside, the first exhibition was titled The Invisible Made Visible. The walls held large format paintings and mixed media installations. Each piece carried the weight of silence and the echo of something once denied. One room featured a looping projection of shadows that shifted and broke apart as visitors passed through. Another held a series of self-portraits layered over archival photographs, the faces blurred, the edges unfinished. It wasn't a story told through words, but through texture, space, and absence. Opening night drew an unexpected crowd. Journalists from major art publications attended. Collectors wandered quietly from piece to piece. A few recognized her. None asked about the party. They asked about the work, its meaning, its process, its evolution. She answered as herself. No aliases, no disguises. Just Sofia Vernon, the woman who had returned not through confrontation, but creation. By the end of the evening, her story had reshaped itself. It no longer belonged to the family that once ignored her, or to the audience that tried to define her. It lived in the walls of her gallery, in the eyes of those who stood still before her work, in the conversations that began in whispers and ended in reverence. She understood then that revenge didn't always come as thunder. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, undeniable growth. Sometimes it was the act of carving out space where none had been given, and in that space she placed her name. Her true name, a name they would never again forget.